Good morning, Annika and Martina.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So we have studied Tristan, Gottfried Tristan, for a long time, and we all agree it's a fantastic text.
Yeah.
Of course.
A wonderful courtly romance. But all the reading is fine, but if we don't ever have a chance to look at the original, something is amiss, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So, should we go to Munich and take a look?
Oh, that'd be fun.
I would know.
Munich has a great library, and they have one of these wonderful manuscripts. It's numbered CGM 51. Well, we cannot quite fly to Munich right now. Right? That's
Unfortunately
possible.
not.
Unfortunately,
Yeah, I would love to as well. But you know, we have special collections.
But special collections.
So this is a general library. It's a great library, right? So there's the entrance, and you can really do great scholarship. But we do have special collections.
So what can we see in special collections?
Well, special collections is like the safe in a bank,
Okay.
where the really valuable things are kept. So that's where the secret kind of rests.
So there is the original.
Well, we didn't quite steal it from the State Library of Munich. I would love to have that manuscript, but I cannot. But anyway, we do have a facsimile.
What is a facsimile?
You know what a fax is?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
So,
a copy of a document.
and it's precisely the same, right? There's
Yeah.
virtually no difference. And
Exactly.
that's exactly the same thing. So fax derives from facsimile, meaning an exact copy.
So they copied the original and then.
Yeah, they basically digitized it and created a new book. So we have lots of facsimiles of medieval manuscripts. And one of the jewels in our library here, in special collections, is Gottfried's Tristan.
So they're in paper, or is it?
It's in paper, but very special paper, and with all the authentic original colors. So it looks precisely as a medieval manuscript.
How are they able to make it look that precisely
Modern technology. And it's often actually so good that when you go to the libraries, let's say Munich or Oxford or Cambridge or Paris, they say, no, you're not allowed to look at the manuscript. We give you the facsimile.
So how are we able to look at
We
the...
do have one of those facsimiles.
So anybody can look at it.
We are in America. So you're a student here, you're a professor, and you just show your ID, your CAT card, and then they will bring out the manuscript, the facsimile.
Wow.
Great.
So we don't have to fly to Munich, although I would love to, but we don't have to fly to Munich, we just can go to the special collections. So that's of course the general entrance, and now let's go into special collections.
Okay.
Okay.
Take a look.
Okay.
All right.
Right? All right. So they allow us to take a look. We have to be very careful, of course. There's always supervision. They don't want anyone to steal anything.
Sure.
You know, these things look beautiful. They're very, very valuable.
How
Yeah.
much about?
So, you know, they produce from each manuscript maybe 500 to 700 copies. So here we are now in special collections. And it's a very special room, you notice. Supervision, and normally when we have special items we use gloves. And so here is our facsimile, beautifully bound now. It's a modern reproduction, and this is then the facsimile.
Oh. Wow.
So you see there is the call number, this is the old one, this is the new one relatively speaking, Codex Germanicus 51. So, and here is the ex libris, that shows who owned this book. It's the Bavarian king. And this is then really the entire manuscript as it looked like.
Wow. I did not expect that.
Right?
This is paper, but what's the original made out of?
Well, this is very special paper, but the original is really parchment or vellum.
What is a vellum made out of?
That's animal skin.
Oh, okay.
So they didn't have paper. Paper came only in by the end of the 13th century. And for a long time, far into the 16th century, they liked to use parchment. Actually, until today, for very special documents, they use parchment.
Still?
Yes, for, let's say, certificates or
Oh,
the
okay.
president's certification. So really
Wow,
valuable
okay.
documents, they still use parchment. Parchment means it's animal skin. And, you know, this is a fairly thick book, maybe about 150 pages or so. And I would assume maybe 600 sheep
Wow.
or calves had to die.
Really?
So that must be really expensive if you're making a book.
That's
must be very valuable.
expensive. That's right. So that explains why a whole team of people were working on such a manuscript.
So you can only take parts of the sheep or whatever animal to...
Yeah, well, it's not easy, you know. You cannot just use the skin around the legs. This is not
Well, yeah,
big
sure.
enough. So it has to be big panels. And then 500, 600 animals.
Wow.
And that's just their normal life, of course. In a monastery, for example, they butcher those animals and then they use everything of that animal, particularly the skin, which is very, very valuable. So for that reason, you could not afford a medieval manuscript. Okay, if a facsimile alone costs maybe, whatever, $12,000, $15,000, then the original manuscript, if you want to buy this,
Wow.
you know, it's much more than a Porsche or a Mercedes. So easily $150,000, $200,000, $300,000.
Wow.
So they're extremely valuable. But in the Middle Ages, you have then, first of all, a whole team of scribes. So this is done in a workshop, in a scriptorium. And so you have, first of all, somebody who creates the parchment. So butcher, you could say, and then they take the skin, they clean it, they scrape off all the hair, the follicles, the fat, and all that. Then they have to stretch it for several days and treat it so that it becomes very sort of supple, and you can use it kind of as paper. Then somebody begins to create lines. See, there are no lines anymore, but behind the text there are lines. So the rubricator draws lines so that the scribe then knows where to put right. So once the scribe has done his or her job, we know by now that more and more actually women were also involved as scribes. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Then comes the corrector. So a man who takes a look at the original, because there's always copies,
Yeah.
and goes from the original to the new manuscript. And if there's a problem, you know, when you copy, how easily you make a mistake, you get tired and you skip a line or whatever, or you skip a whole page, horror. So then the corrector comes in and he uses a eraser and erases the text.
Oh, but it's ink. How do they get rid of it?
Well, when you take paper, you cannot do that, right? You scratch out and then the paper rips. With parchment, that's not the case. Parchment is strong leather.
Yeah.
So you can use a razor and scrape off the text.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
But it does never quite disappear. After all, it is parchment, it's leather, it's living matter. So the ink really penetrates the entire microscopic structure.
So it stays?
To some extent. So we have this very odd phenomenon that when you take a very close look, particularly with a infrared light, sometimes you can see text underneath text.
So we could technically see the mistakes if we wanted to.
Yes, or we can find secret texts.
Oh.
You know, like how kids do that. They use ink, not ink, they use, I think, lemon juice.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And then they write it on a piece of paper, they dry it, and it disappears. And then you have to hold the piece of paper over a candle, and suddenly the script reappears.
Yeah.
We call this whole thing palimpsest. Palimpsest means there is a text underneath the text. So not that necessarily we have one here, but this could easily be the case. So we have here the ink. It's all by hand. So the entire book is written by hand.
And it's a number of people working on it, not just one.
Normally you have 2 or 3 scribes,
Okay.
but we study this very carefully and we can really tell precisely what scribe did what manuscript.
Okay.
So we can really create kind of a network, manuscript X, manuscript C, that's the one scribe. So what we have here then is at first a fairly plain looking manuscript. You have a nice initial right there. You have 2 columns. And the first major question would be for us, how do we identify the pages? And so we see here with pencil, a later hand probably, number 1. Then we turn it over, but we don't see a page number there.
So how did you differentiate the back from the
Right.
front?
So here we say 1 recto.
Okay.
That's the page up front. This would be then 1V verso.
All right.
And since we have 2 columns, we can say, for example, page 1 recto A. And this column is then B. And then we can add a specific line number.
Okay.
Very interesting. And this scribe particularly has put in an alphabet to show us precisely what line we are talking about.
Oh.
So the numbers, the page numbers,
Yes.
they do look already like Arabic numbers,
That's
but
right. Yes.
the language in which
That's
the document is written does
right.
not really look like.
Yeah.
What language is that?
This
Or what-
is a very good question. This is Middle High German, and it's of course a different language than today. And in the course of time, we have more and more different librarians who then sometimes add new call numbers, as we have there.
Okay.
That's the old call number. This is the new call number. So, but let's take a look at the overall manuscript, because that is really what we are interested in today. We notice, of course, it's dirty.
Yeah.
It looks very dirty, or at least the original. Why do you think it's so dirty?
Probably so many fingerprints, so much dirt on fingers.
That's right. You know, when people turn over, they lick. And so the dirtier a manuscript is, the more we can tell that it was really used. We have lots of manuscripts that are very, very clean. So that means they were just kept in the library and no one ever took a
Not
look.
very
Yes,
famous.
So
that's
this was
right.
definitely read by
That
a lot of
seems-
people over time.
Yes, you can see, you know, edge is jagged. We have holes there. But I had, oh, there some stains. I mean, we could not say coffee stains. They didn't drink coffee.
Yeah.
Coffee only came from America, right? But what we notice is sometimes that there are also holes in the manuscript. Or the manuscript ripped. If you just see here, for example, something happened there. This is, of course, leather. And in order to save that page, they didn't want to rewrite the whole page. They sewed it together.
Oh yeah, you can see.
You can see
needlework.
exactly.
Yeah.
thread.
Exactly. But the other interesting thing, I think I had an example right up front, yes. You see, for example, this was a hole. This is, after all, leather.
Yeah.
And sometimes, you know, where and how do you kill the animal?
Oh,
Oh,
you have
okay,
to.
yeah.
Yeah,
Shoot
so
them or stab them.
sometimes you see even the hole where they stabbed in.
Because it's here, it's here as well, and there, a little
right,
bit, and there too.
right.
They really used as much of that leather as they could.
Yes. The other problem is, of course, this is leather. And for some critters, leather tastes quite well. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Bookworms?
Bookworms. Indeed, this is not only a metaphor, this is very, very concrete. That's also one of the reasons why these manuscripts are kept in safes, climate controlled. Even this here is kept in our safe here. It is a climate controlled room, so you cannot get in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they want to make sure that these books that are extremely valuable is very well kept. And so, however, in many manuscripts in the original I've seen, they look terrible.
Yeah, I mean, they're
Temperature,
old, yeah, sure.
humidity coming in, bookworms having a feast day, chomping away, and they have no respect, even for the Bible or whatever. They just eat away those manuscripts.
So this is in pretty good condition considering.
This is considering, yeah, it is still pretty much in a good condition. One thing is very interesting. We do have 27 manuscripts. So this text, as far as we can tell, was at least copied 27 times. That means 12 full manuscripts and 15 fragments.
Okay.
So this is a copy of a fragment, or
This is a complete version.
okay.
So this entire manuscript actually contains Gottfried's text, Gottfried von Strassburg's Tristan,
Yeah.
and then a continuation.
Oh.
You remember Gottfried's Tristan
Yeah.
just ends as a fragment, and they just didn't like fragments. So, although we find it today very, very interesting, very meaningful, but in the Middle Ages they didn't like fragments. No one liked fragments. So other writers, like this one, Ulrich von Thürheim, continued. And that happens to somewhere right in the middle. And so that's quite interesting. I want to talk a little bit about the illustrations, because this is a similia, so illustrated manuscript. We'll come to that in a minute, more greater details. But I wanted to focus on this one. This is the ending of our story.
Okay.
This is not what Gottfried writes about, but it's fascinating because many, many other versions discuss the ending. So what you see here at the very end is, that's what Ulrich talks about, and some French authors. Tristan is mortally wounded. He calls his true beloved Isolde in. And if she comes, her sail is supposed to be white. So she indeed arrives. But in the meantime, he's married to the third Isolde. Remember, right, this problematic situation, who is kind of angry and, rightly so, jealous, and tells him that the sail is black. So he turns over and dies. And then Isolde comes in, and she sees her true beloved. She throws herself on the corpse, and then she dies as well. And the nice thing is, what the poet and the artist has done, you see now both are buried there, and the plants grow out of the grave and eternally intertwined, because love lasts forever.
Oh, that's
An
nice.
interesting love theme.
Yeah. These are really pretty. The
Yes.
colors are very vibrant still.
They're still very vibrant, that's very true. So let's talk about that. And you notice that the entire manuscript is richly illuminated. So we do have not only the scribes, not only the artist who created the initials, not only the rubricator, and not only the corrector, we also have then the artists. And you can imagine how much true art costs. So this is extremely valuable already at that time.
And the colorful ink.
Yes,
Yeah.
so we have here always, that's very interesting for this manuscript, we have here 3 registers. And I cannot go into all the details right now, but these individual scenes or episodes that correlate more or less to the text. Art historians have studied this and have often found that this often doesn't quite correlate. So the artist might have had a general idea and he just created his artwork, and often this is actually a different narrative, slightly different.
Is it because they didn't know the story, or they just decided
That
to
could
depict
well
it
be,
differently?
or they just did not have a quite clear idea,
Okay.
or they had a different view, or they had some freedom and they just created this, and you cannot just wipe this out or scratch this out completely, right?
So not only the written text is going to get continued from, so as well, the
Right.
paintings, because
Yes.
they look different than
Yes.
the ones in the back.
Yes, so what we, sort of a collaboration of researchers are working on this. So on the one hand, we have the codicologists. So that's a codex. So a codex means a manuscript. And they study really all the details. So then the art historians come in and they look at the artwork itself, because that's very important. We see horses, clothing, arms, shields, music instruments, a king sitting there on his throne, hair fashion. All these things are really important for us to understand. Let's take another example. This is not so visible.
Oh,
you
yeah.
see this kind of fading there. But also then very interesting gestures. Here somebody is being killed. This could be the battle between Revalin and Morgan. And so you really can study, or you're supposed to study, these images like children's books today, a little bit, because after all, most people couldn't read.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
So the scribes could read, of course, and some intellectuals, but most poets, for example, even couldn't read, and they were doing everything orally. So an enormous ability to memorize.
Yeah.
So,
Such a big story.
right. Let's just focus on one scene which I recognize immediately here, and you might be able to help me. So you see this man here playing the harp and sitting in his boat. So I suppose this is Tristan, wounded with his festering wounds, smelly, and traveling then to Ireland. So then it goes on, all kinds of scenes here. We'd have to take a much closer look to understand it fully. But it allows us to go into the text and regard these illustrations already as a form of interpretation.
Yeah.
So, and oh, here we have another beautiful example. Look how much is missing there.
Oh yeah.
So this is very problematic. I mean, we look at our text, English translation, and it seems to be all just fine and
Yeah.
conform, homogeneous. In reality, well, you know, we have, as I said, 27 manuscripts, of which 6 are actually lost.
Oh.
We know that they existed through references, library catalogs, and so forth, but they're gone. So what we have then in our hands nowadays is an attempt to create an historical critical edition. So the scholars then take all these manuscripts together and compare and contrast and then determine, okay, this is maybe my best text. There are various approaches in the past, and they tried to collate, put together, and then kind of recreated the quote-unquote real text. Today we are much more careful, and we only say, well, this text appears in this manuscript, and this is just missing. You have a huge gap here.
So you hope what's missing in here is present in another text.
Exactly. But this is not necessarily the case. And so, because maybe sometimes centuries apart or decades apart. And so for that reason, these facsimiles are so extremely important. The interesting thing is also that the libraries in France, Bibliothèque Nationale, Staatsbibliothek in Munich, or Oxford Bodleian Library, they are in a very heavy process right now of digitization. So they digitize all their manuscripts. Heidelberg does a great job. So that we preserve that for the future, and that you can simply go online and you don't have to, I mean, it's much nicer, of course, to look at this right here. Okay, so, but it's a great manuscript, and it's a wonderful way of studying Gottfried's Tristan.
Well, and at least keep it for longer than.
Oh
Yeah.
yes, absolutely. And I find it so fascinating. Now we are in Tucson, University of Arizona. That's the southwest of the United States, and we do have the Munich manuscript here.
How did we manage to get that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. We do have a group of people, they're called Friends of the Library, who regularly donate money to the library, and so the library on a regular basis purchases items such as these. They also buy, and if you go into the special collections safe in the vault, they buy early modern prints. So we have many, many different modern prints from 1470, 71, 1480. We call them incunabula, early modern prints. And we have original print, 4th edition of Milton's Paradise Lost. We have many, many other world chronicles, Bibles from the late 15th, early 16th centuries. So, and this is just an incredible treasure.
Yeah.
And it's all available to you, right? To anyone, the public. You just have to treat it very carefully. You notice this is here.
Yeah, what are these for? The
You
pads?
notice this is, of course, an old book, and we want to make sure that nothing falls out, so that the binding is protected.
Okay.
And when the manuscript itself is very brittle, or very much in danger of falling apart, then you're supposed to use gloves. So not like we do right now, but it is a facsimile. Facsimile is a different story than a manuscript. You notice how much the scribe had to work and how much planning went into this. The text had to be arranged very carefully with the various initials. So it's really an extremely interesting and beautiful example of a medieval manuscript. Yeah, okay, so I invite you just to leaf through this book. Anyone can do this as long as you treat these books, these facsimiles, with great respect. I think we can be extremely proud of our library, of our university, having these incredible bibliophile treasures.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
So-
that's awesome.
It gives us a completely different impression of Tristan. Having studied it, that was all great, wonderful, but this is the next step.
You really get to see the history with
Yeah.
this.
Right?
And the paintings.
Yes.
Yes, and the text itself, we can see and feel and almost smell the scribe sitting there and carefully writing down letter by letter. You might of course wonder, how long does it take to write a whole book like that?
Yeah.
So if you are a very good professional scribe, we estimate roughly
10 years?
no, 6-8 months or something like that. Actually, they were so good that by the end of the Middle Ages, when book printing had come in, that often they preferred to write by hand because it was still faster, still cheaper. So the early printed books, Johannes Gutenberg, his Bibles, they were more costly, more expensive than manuscripts.
Like every new invention.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But by, let's say, 1480, 1490, the technology had matured so much that then indeed the time of the manuscript slowly came to an end. But we still call that time, let's say between 1450, when he invented the printing press, until about 1500, the time of the incunabula, so of the early printed book.
Oh, okay.
And from then on, after 1500, just the early modern book. But anyway, so this is Tristan, Gottfried's Tristan, and we do have the, one more time, we do have here the facsimile from the Munich State Library, Staatsbibliothek. It is the manuscript CGM 51, and we are really most fortunate to have this book beautifully bound in a modern binding. And I just invite everyone, enjoy this book, and thank you very much, Annika and Martina, and I hope that you will take the chance to take a good look at this manuscript.